Would you believe some of history's most important ideas were once treated as jokes by the very experts meant to recognize them? Doctors mocked hand-washing. Geologists rejected moving continents. Newspapers laughed at moon rockets. And specialists insisted bacteria could never survive stomach acid. Yet these 4 stories will challenge what you think separates a reckless fool from someone who simply sees the future first. Because sometimes the world rejects an idea not because it is wrong, but because accepting it would make everyone else uncomfortable. In 1846, Ignaz Semmelweis entered Vienna's largest maternity hospital and found a mystery nobody around him seemed desperate to solve. Women entering one clinic faced a terrifyingly higher risk of childbed fever than women delivering inside the hospital's neighboring clinic. The rooms stood in the same building, served similar patients, and followed similar schedules, yet their outcomes remained dramatically different. Semmelweis tested every explanation he could imagine, including overcrowding, weather, ventilation, birthing positions, religious rituals, and even the sound of bells. Nothing explained why the first clinic, staffed by physicians and medical students, remained far deadlier than the midwives' clinic nearby. Then a colleague developed symptoms resembling childbed fever after a small accident during an examination, and Semmelweis finally saw the connection. Doctors often moved directly from the autopsy room to maternity beds, carrying invisible material on hands they barely washed. Semmelweis could not see bacteria, but he suspected contaminated particles were traveling directly from one hospital room into another. He ordered physicians and students to scrub with chlorinated lime before examining patients, a demand many considered insulting and excessive. Then the mortality rate collapsed, falling so sharply that the numbers seemed to announce the answer more clearly than Semmelweis could. That should have transformed medicine immediately, but his discovery carried an accusation few respected doctors were willing to accept. To believe Semmelweis meant admitting that healers, not bad air or fate, had unknowingly carried danger between vulnerable patients. Colleagues questioned his statistics, disliked his confrontational manner, and rejected an explanation that lacked the germ theory medicine still needed. Semmelweis grew furious, attacked prominent critics in public letters, and made his correct argument increasingly difficult for others to hear. He continued producing strong results in Budapest, yet published his full book late, densely, and without winning the audience he needed. He died in 1865, before Pasteur and Lister helped establish the microbial explanation that finally made his observations understandable. Today, hand hygiene is among medicine's simplest protections, built upon an idea doctors once considered offensive, unnecessary, and scientifically impossible. Semmelweis had evidence without an accepted mechanism. The next man had a continent-sized pattern, but could not explain what moved it. In 1910, Alfred Wegener noticed something schoolchildren still notice today. South America and Africa appear strangely capable of fitting together. Most geologists treated that resemblance as coincidence, because entire continents wandering across Earth sounded less scientific than almost anything else. Wegener kept looking, and the matching coastlines became only the beginning of a much larger collection of disturbing geological clues. Identical fossils appeared on lands separated by oceans, while mountain chains and ancient rock layers seemed to continue across distant continents. Evidence of old glaciers crossed regions now tropical, suggesting those lands had once occupied very different positions on the planet. In 1912, Wegener publicly proposed continental drift, arguing that today's continents had once formed one enormous connected prehistoric landmass. The evidence was provocative, but one devastating question followed every presentation: what force could possibly move an entire continent? Wegener suggested tidal and rotational forces, but his calculations were far too weak to move such immense masses of rock. That flaw gave critics exactly what they needed, and some dismissed continental drift as fancy-dressed and carefully selected evidence. Wegener was also a meteorologist entering geologist territory, making established specialists even less willing to take his argument seriously. He revised his book repeatedly, gathered more examples, and continued defending the central pattern without ever solving its missing mechanism. During a Greenland expedition in 1930, Wegener died on the ice, decades before geology accepted the possibility he defended. Then, ocean mapping revealed enormous mid-ocean ridges, magnetic patterns, deep trenches, and a seafloor that was constantly being renewed. By the 1960s, seafloor spreading and plate tectonics finally supplied the mechanism Wegener had never been able to identify. The continents were not simply plowing through fixed ocean crust, but they were moving as parts of larger plates. Wegener's mechanism was wrong, Yet the supposedly ridiculous pattern at the center of his theory had been real all along. Maps, fossils, mountains, and vanished glaciers had been telling the same story. Science simply lacked the language to understand it. The next visionary looked even farther than moving continents, toward a destination newspapers considered suitable only for fantasy writers. As a teenager, Robert Goddard climbed a cherry tree and imagined building a machine that might someday travel toward Mars. He later called that afternoon his anniversary day. Privately marking the moment, an impossible childhood thought became a lifelong scientific mission. By 1919, Goddard had published serious calculations describing high-altitude rockets, multiple stages, and even a possible journey toward the moon. The suggestion reached newspapers, where one influential editorial confidently explained why his rocket could never function in empty space. The newspaper argued rockets needed air to push against, then mocked Goddard for lacking knowledge supposedly taught in high school. But rockets do not push against air, they accelerate by expelling mass in the opposite direction, exactly as Goddard understood. Public ridicule made him increasingly private, so he continued testing engines while sharing as little as possible with reporters. In March 1926, on a snowy Massachusetts farm, Goddard prepared a thin liquid-fueled rocket that resembled exposed laboratory plumbing. It burned for only a few seconds and rose roughly 12 meters, a tiny flight carrying an enormous future. Neighbors saw an awkward machine hopping above a field history now recognizes the first successful launch of a liquid-fueled rocket. Goddard continued experimenting in New Mexico with guidance systems, pumps, gyroscopes, and designs that anticipated essential features of modern rocketry. Recognition remained limited, and he died in 1945 before satellites, astronauts, or lunar missions made his vision appear reasonable. Then rockets crossed oceans, entered orbit, carried humans beyond Earth, and transformed Goddard's private calculations into ordinary modern engineering. In July 1969, while Apollo 11 traveled toward the moon, the same newspaper quietly corrected its earlier misunderstanding of rocket physics. The correction arrived 14 years after the ridicule, and 24 years after Goddard could have finally read it himself. Every modern launch still depends upon principles he pursued when respectable opinion considered serious spaceflight an embarrassing scientific fantasy. Yet the final story is stranger, because its scientists did not launch a rocket or move continents, he experimented on himself. And what he deliberately swallowed challenged one of modern medicine's most profitable, familiar, and deeply protected beliefs about disease. In the early 1980s, doctors blamed most stomach ulcers on stress, spicy food, excess acid, and unfortunate personal habits. Patients received antacids, restrictive diets, or surgery, but recurring ulcers remained common because treatment rarely addressed the hidden cause. Australian pathologist Robin Warren kept noticing curved bacteria inside inflamed stomach tissue, where textbooks said bacteria should not survive. Young physician Barry Marshall joined him, convinced the strange organisms mattered, rather than representing harmless contamination inside already damaged tissue. Their first attempts to grow the bacteria failed, strengthening the convenient belief that Warren's tiny shapes meant nothing medically important. Then laboratory plates were accidentally left incubating through a long Easter weekend, giving the slow-growing organism enough time to appear. Marshall and Warren found the same bacterium in many patients with gastritis and ulcers, but correlation alone convinced almost nobody. Specialists argued that damaged stomachs merely allowed bacteria to arrive later, making the organism a passenger rather than the cause. Unable to create a useful animal model, Marshall made a decision that sounded reckless even to people supporting his research. He drank a cultured sample of the bacteria, deliberately turning his own stomach into the experiment nobody else would approve. Within days, he developed nausea, unpleasant breath, and stomach inflammation, while a biopsy revealed the organism spreading exactly as predicted. Antibiotics cleared the infection, but one dramatic self-experiment still could not rewrite decades of accepted medical practice entirely by itself. Clinical studies gradually showed that eliminating Helicobacter pylori allowed ulcers to heal and greatly reduced their chance of returning. Resistance continued because the old explanation felt familiar, while acid-suppressing treatment already fit deeply established routines throughout modern medicine. By the 1990s, major medical guidance finally recognized antibiotics as essential treatment for many ulcers caused by the bacterium. In 2005, Marshall and Warren received the Nobel Prize for discovering Helicobacter pylori and its role in gastritis and ulcers. Marshall did not prove everything by drinking bacteria. That astonishing act forced attention, while careful research completed the case. The impossible organism had survived stomach acid all along, hidden in plain sight while experts confidently treated the wrong problem. Semmelweis, Wegener, Goddard, and Marshall were not correct about every detail, nor were all their critics foolish or dishonest. But each recognized evidence that established thinking could not comfortably explain, then endured ridicule rather than abandoning the central question. Their stories do not prove every rejected idea is brilliant. Most rejected ideas are rejected because they are genuinely wrong. They prove something more unsettling occasionally. The person who sounds unreasonable is simply describing a world everyone else has not reached yet.